Let's go!
You're listening to the Cage Nation TV Prizefight Podcast. Coming to you from the Candid Cameron Studios in State College, Pennsylvania. Here's your host, Albert Cameron.
Happy New Year, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us on the Cage Nation TV Prizefight Podcast, hosted right here on SoundCloud.com, and of course, always available at CageNationTV.com. The Prizefight Podcast is something new we're doing. Our New Year's resolution is to try to bring more MMA coverage. Always looking to expand our mediums and platforms. For Drew and I, we're going back to the home roots. We're both radio guys. Of course, this means always good things for CageNationTV.com, the YouTube channel, and the video series. Rob and I will be looking to ramp up the coverage we do with all that. The Prizefight Podcast is really just an opportunity for me to sound off whenever I just get a free second and get some things off my chest that necessarily try to be a little bit more in the moment. Today's the initial introduction to the Prizefight Podcast. It's going to be easy. It's going to be simple. I'm not going to overload you guys too much. With it being the brand new year, I wanted to talk about a New Year's Eve tradition, and that, of course, being Japanese MMA, specifically the Rizin Fighting Federation's inaugural New Year's Eve event, which featured the return of Fedor Emelianenko, the Last Emperor. Gabby Garcia made her debut. Kron Gracie made his debut. And I'm wondering, I'm going to introduce the discussion. Is Japanese MMA back the way we all hoped it would be? It's been quite a few years since the Pride Fighting Championships was sold. Dream Stage Entertainment no longer held the ownership. That went to the Pride FC Holdings LLC, owned by the Fertittas and Mr. Dana White. And now Sakakibara is back with the Rizin. If you guys know the exact enunciation of Rizin or Rizin, I've heard it both ways. If you hear about it, just let me know on Twitter at CageNationTV.com. But specifically, the couple things I want to talk about. The return of Rizin Fighting Federation, or the return of Japanese MMA through the Rizin Fighting Federation, it kind of made me wonder, was Pride as good as we all thought it was? And the reason I'm asking that is, Fedor's fight with Jaideep Singh, it kind of left a little bit to the imagination. If you saw Gabby Garcia's fight, it wasn't world-class striking, if you get what I'm saying. So the question being is Japanese MMA back? And I present to you, I don't think Japanese MMA ever left. The Pancrase Fighting Organization, one of the oldest, certainly outdates the UFC. Pancrase has been promoting and has been putting out a lot of good stuff since Pride's demise. If it weren't for Pancrase, we wouldn't know of names like Rin Nakai, Nate the Great Marquardt, Boss Rudin, El Guapo, Ken Shamrock, Frank Shamrock, all these legendary kings of Pancrase. In its wake, the ONE FC and Road FC have also been kind of supporting Asian MMA. The UFC made their forays into the Road to Japan, as well as the Ultimate Fighter China. All these things are kind of still there as far as Japanese MMA goes. Now, when Fedor Emelianenko was announcing his return, I was super excited. There are two kind of camps in the world. There are people who believe that Anderson the Spider Silva is the greatest of all time. There are also people who believe that Fedor Emelianenko is the greatest of all time. Rob belongs to the Anderson Silva is the greatest of all time. I belong to the Fedor Emelianenko is the greatest of all time. And those disagreements really kind of lead to the good discussions and topics and arguments that you guys have come to love on Cage Nation TV. Now, when Fedor Emelianenko, when his match was announced, he could have fought anybody. Takayama is still in competition. He could have even, it was Japan. It could have been open weight. He could have fought Sakuraba for all we cared. Mirko Krokop Filipovic was in retirement. Like, there was a whole lot of people he could have fought. And then it was announced he was fighting Jaideep Singh, which, let's not take away from Jaideep Singh. He's a K1 level striker, and then he only has one fight to his name, so that was kind of problematic. Now, that one fight was in the Super Fight League out of India, which has a lot of really stiff competition. There are no slouches by any stretch of the imagination. But is he on the level where he needs to be fighting Fedor Emelianenko to make Emelianenko relevant as the number one heavyweight in the world again? And I'm going to say no. Jaideep Singh, a good challenge for other gatekeepers, maybe not Emelianenko, who has been touted as the greatest of all time, who has been touted as the greatest heavyweight champion of all time, was not the challenge that I think. Of course, this is all opinionated. This is all Albert Cameron just talking from the hip. I don't think that Jaideep Singh versus Fedor Emelianenko was the appropriate matchup for Emelianenko. I think there are other, if we're going with legacy, we're going for nostalgia, I think there's a lot of other guys in the Pride Fighting Championship ring that would have been better challenges for Fedor's return to Japanese MMA. The monster Kevin Randleman, again, Takayama, even Igor Vovchanchin. If they could have pulled him out of retirement, all would have been, I think, better fights for Fedor than what Jaideep Singh was. After Fedor's victory over Jaideep Singh, what's left? Who's he left to fight? Has he become more relevant? And I can't honestly tell you with any degree of certainty that he has. I can't say that a victory over Jaideep Singh has put him in a position where he's now a challenger. The last time Fedor fought for a title was when Affliction was trying to out-promote the UFC, and they didn't do so hot because they weren't able to get that third event off the ground because Josh Barnett was unable to make his medicals. And without that third event, Affliction eventually bowed to the UFC. They all came together. We hugged. We kissed. It was beautiful. But Fedor was fighting in the Affliction Fighting Organization for the WAMMA title, which was the World Association of Mixed Martial Arts. And that in and of itself is another tangent. The UFC Mixed Martial Arts runs on a promotional model. And what that means is that we have promotions. We have like Gladiators of the Cage. We have the Pinnacle Fighting Championship. We have the Ultimate Fighting Championships. These are promotions. They're not sanctioning bodies. And that's what a lot of people feel is the problem with boxing. Boxing is run on the sanctioning body model, which means that we've got Golden Boy, we've got Iron Mike Productions, we have these different events that, hey, I'm going to go to Altoona or I'm going to go to Pittsburgh and I'm going to have a boxing match under Albert Cameron Boxing, but I have to get it sanctioned by the WBC or the IBF or the WBO, and then we're going to fight for a title. Does that title mean anything? Essentially, we don't know because it's so convoluted, it's hard to keep track of. So when they tried to introduce the World Association of Mixed Martial Arts, it was kind of convoluting things. If Fedor had been fighting for the Affliction Championship against Andrei Arlovsky, against Tim Sylvia, and maybe perhaps against Josh Barnett, it'd be one thing. We'd know that he was Affliction's champion. But now the WAMMA tried to step in and introduce themselves as an authority. Authority over what? I mean, at the time, with the promotional model of MMA, the UFC had the best heavyweights. So for the WAMMA to say that they are the World Association of Mixed Martial Arts, well, that's like being the champion of backyard fighting. It doesn't really mean a whole lot because you don't have the best heavyweights under your sanction. That is kind of what the Rizin Fighting Federation's trying to do. So coming back full circle, last time Fedor fought for a title, it was for Affliction, for a title that, in my opinion, really didn't mean much. But now the Rizin Fighting Federation is calling themselves a federation and not an organization, not a championship promotional body. They're trying to get involved with Bellator, with a couple promotions out of England, out of Japan, out of the North America, and they're trying to kind of establish themselves as the sanctioning body. Now, if they're able to make it work, that is fantastic. I would love to be able to see it, but I've been around long enough to know that historically, sanctioning bodies don't work in mixed martial arts. The promotional model has been successful. It's what we know, it's what we're comfortable with, and that's really where the evolution's going. If you watch UFC Fight Pass, you know that the UFC is kind of heading towards the sanctioning body in ways of offering resources. UFC right now has the Fight Pass, and other smaller promotions are clamoring to get onto Fight Pass. And with them trying to get onto Fight Pass, UFC really has a say of what goes. They have their commentators, they have their own announcers, their own news folks, and they're kind of bolstering these smaller promotions. It's kind of like the sanctioning body, but it is still under a promotional model. It's not the UFC presents, backyard fights, or UFC presents fights in Russia. It's still Shooto Brazil. It's still Invicta Fighting Championships. It's still the promotional model. So, on the undercard, on the good side of the Rizin Fighting Federation, is that King Muhammad Lawal, who was a real pro wrestling standout, an amateur wrestling standout. King Mo won, I believe it was the tournament, which is good. That's what we need to be focusing on. King Mo is still young enough, he's still strong enough, he's still promotionally adept enough that he is able to go out there and be a name. And I think King Mo is who they should have been focusing on a long time ago. I think with King Mo's win, he should be getting the undercard, the co-main spot on the Shamrock versus Gracie card as opposed to Dada 5000 and Kimbo Slice. But who am I to judge? Scott Coker has not hired me to be a thinker. I can honestly tell you that I don't think the Cage Nation TV or the Prizefight Podcast is on Scott Coker's radar, but that's okay. Hopefully, with your help, it will be someday. On the ugly side of the undercard was Gabby Garcia's fight. Gabby Garcia, of course, is a grappling wizard. She is no joke. She is everything that women's jiu-jitsu and jiu-jitsu in general should be striving for. She's an absolute. She trains a lot. She's strong. She works on being the best grappler that she possibly can be. Whenever she was announced she was going to fight at the Rizin Fighting Federation, I'm thinking, oh, good. We're going to get ourselves a really, really good grappling match, and hopefully she has some striking trainers that are going to help her defend strikes, and she's going to be able to compete effectively. She fought Sani Drawn at the Rizin Fighting Federation, and I'm not going to lie, and a lot of other people will tell you this, especially if you've read the internet, it wasn't the strongest showing of striking that Gabby Garcia could have possibly gone out with. We know that a lot of the power strikes come from the rotation in the waist. The rotation in the waist, that's where the power comes from. Gabby Garcia was kind of throwing from her arms. It really looked like day one kickboxing stuff. So, with the effective training and striking, I think Gabby Garcia really does have a hope, does have a really big future in MMA. I think as we are kind of clamoring to establish other fighters in women's MMA, because now that Ronda Rousey is now a challenger, not the champion, the women's bantamweight division as a whole is going to be evolving. The women's strawweight division is going to be evolving. Will there be a women's featherweight? Well, in the UFC anyway. Chris Cyborg, of course, is the Invicta FC Featherweight Championship. Will there be a women's lightweight division? As women's MMA becomes more popular, becomes more visible, absolutely. There's gonna be heavier weight classes for women's MMA. So that's really what I wanted to get off my chest today for the initial Prizefight podcast. Thank you guys very much for listening. Interact with us. We want to know what you guys thought. Of course, you can check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/CageNationTV, on Twitter @CageNationTV, on YouTube, youtube.com/C/CageNationTV. Thank you guys very much for listening to the initial Prizefight podcast. We got more coming up next week. If you'd like to interact with us at all, please get a hold of us. We'd love to hear from you. My name's Albert Cameron. It's been the Cage Nation TV Prizefight Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Cage Nation Prizefight Podcast. All rights reserved, 2015-2016 Planetary Sports. The Prizefight Podcast is part of the Cage Nation Broadcast Network. For more information, visit www.cagenationtv.com.